I never expected a simple DNA test to unravel the fabric of everything I thought I knew about family. My name is Sarah, and until 3 months ago I was just another stepdaughter in what seemed like a perfectly blended American family. But science has a way of revealing truths that challenge our most basic assumptions about blood, biology, and belonging. It started innocently enough. My stepfather, Dr. Michael Harrison, a genetics professor at our local university, had been conducting research on familial DNA patterns. As part of his study, he asked our family to participate in what he called routine genetic mapping. My mother, Rebecca, agreed enthusiastically, along with my 2 half-siblings, Emma and Jake. I was hesitant at first, but curiosity eventually won over my reservations. The results arrived on a Tuesday morning that would forever divide my life into before and after. Dr. Harrison called me into his study, his usually confident demeanor replaced by something I'd never seen before: complete bewilderment. The papers in his hands trembled slightly as he spoke words that didn't seem to make sense. "Sarah, according to these results, you share more genetic material with Rebecca and me than our biological children do." I laughed initially, assuming it was some kind of mistake or perhaps one of his academic jokes. But the seriousness in his eyes told a different story. The DNA analysis showed that I shared 52% of my genetic markers with my stepfather and 48% with my mother, while Emma and Jake each showed the expected 50% with their biological parents. The impossible had somehow become measurable reality. The next few weeks were a blur of consultations with geneticists, repeated tests, and sleepless nights trying to comprehend what we'd discovered. Dr. Harrison, despite his expertise in genetics, found himself in uncharted territory. He reached out to colleagues across the country, sharing our anonymized data and seeking explanations for what seemed to defy fundamental biological laws. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a leading geneticist from Johns Hopkins, became our primary consultant. Through video calls and encrypted data transfers, she helped us understand that what we were witnessing was theoretically possible, though extraordinarily rare. "What you're seeing," she explained during one late-night consultation, "could be the result of a phenomenon called genetic mosaicism, combined with what we call cryptic relatedness." The science was complex, but essentially my biological father had unknowingly been a genetic mosaic, a person carrying 2 distinct sets of DNA within his body. This condition, occurring in fewer than 1 in 10,000 people, meant that the sperm that created me carried genetic material that was remarkably similar to both Michael and Rebecca's DNA due to ancestral connections spanning several generations. But there was more. Rebecca's family genealogy, which we'd never thoroughly investigated, revealed that her great-great-grandmother had been part of a small, isolated community in rural Montana. Michael's ancestry traced back to the same region, the same time period. Their families had been intermarrying for generations without their knowledge, creating a genetic foundation that made my unusual DNA profile not just possible but inevitable. Understanding the science was one thing. Processing the emotional implications was entirely different. I found myself caught between 2 worlds, technically not their biological daughter, yet genetically closer to them than their own children. The paradox was both fascinating and devastating. Emma and Jake's reactions were perhaps the most difficult to witness. Emma, who had always struggled with feeling like the middle child, suddenly found scientific validation for her insecurities. "So you really are more their daughter than I am," she said one evening, her voice carrying a hurt I'd never heard before. Jake, typically the family comedian, went uncharacteristically quiet, spending more time alone in his room. My relationship with Rebecca became strained in unexpected ways. She began treating me differently, not with less love, but with a kind of scientific fascination that made me feel like a specimen rather than her daughter. She would catch herself staring at me during dinner, analyzing my features for resemblances she'd never noticed before. "You have Michael's hands," she'd say suddenly, interrupting normal conversation with observations that felt both intimate and clinical. Michael threw himself into research with obsessive intensity, determined to understand every nuance of our situation. He contacted genealogists, historians, and even anthropologists studying the Montana community our families had unknowingly shared. His study became a command center of family trees, DNA charts, and academic papers. I often found him there at 3 a.m., surrounded by evidence of our genetic connection, as if he could solve the emotional puzzle through scientific analysis. The strangest part was how I began to see myself differently. Looking in the mirror became an exercise in genetic archaeology. Were those Michael's eyes or just a coincidence? Did my laugh really sound like Rebecca's? Or was I imagining similarities that the DNA results suggested should exist? Word of our situation, despite our attempts at privacy, began to spread through Michael's academic circles. We became an anonymous case study, referenced in papers and discussed at genetics conferences. The attention was both validating and invasive. Journalists began reaching out, offering to tell our story. Documentary filmmakers expressed interest. We declined all requests, but the pressure was constant. The impact on our extended family was significant. Rebecca's parents, who had always treated me kindly but with the polite distance typical of step-grandparents, suddenly became intensely interested in my childhood, my interests, my dreams. They began including me in family photos with a prominence that made my half-siblings uncomfortable. Family gatherings became exercises in navigating new dynamics that none of us fully understood. Michael's research revealed that at least 12 other families in our area might have similar genetic overlap due to the historical intermarrying in that Montana community. He began reaching out to them with their permission to study whether our case was truly unique or part of a larger pattern. 3 families agreed to testing, and preliminary results suggested we weren't alone in this genetic anomaly. The psychological impact was profound for all of us. We began family therapy with Dr. Patricia Chin, a specialist in genetics counseling. Through her guidance, we learned to separate genetic relatedness from emotional bonds, scientific curiosity from family love. Families are built on more than DNA, she reminded us repeatedly. Your connections run deeper than any test can measure. But even as we worked through the emotional challenges, I couldn't shake the feeling that our discovery was leading us toward something bigger than just understanding our own family dynamics. The breakthrough came 6 months after our initial discovery, and it wasn't what any of us expected. Michael's obsessive research into the Montana community revealed something extraordinary. My biological father hadn't just been a genetic mosaic by random chance. He had been part of a secret government study conducted in the 1970s, examining the effects of environmental factors on genetic expression in isolated communities. The documents Michael uncovered through Freedom of Information Act requests painted a disturbing picture. The community where both families originated had been unknowingly exposed to experimental treatments designed to study genetic adaptation. My biological father's mosaicism wasn't a natural occurrence. It was the result of genetic manipulation conducted without consent on an entire population. This revelation reframed everything. I wasn't just genetically closer to my stepparents by coincidence or natural ancestral connections. I was the product of scientific experimentation that had created artificial genetic similarities across family lines. The government study had been designed to create exactly what we'd discovered: children who could be genetically closer to unrelated adults than to their own biological siblings. The emotional impact of this truth was initially devastating, but ultimately liberating. We weren't a genetic anomaly to be studied or explained. We were a family brought together by circumstances beyond our control, connected by bonds that transcended both biology and manipulation. The artificial nature of my genetic similarity to Michael and Rebecca somehow made our chosen family connections feel more authentic, not less. Emma and Jake's relief was palpable. Their genetic normalcy wasn't a deficiency. It was evidence of their natural, unmanipulated heritage. They began to see my situation not as competition for their parents' love, but as validation of how extraordinary our blended family had always been. We decided to go public with our story, not as a scientific curiosity, but as advocates for families affected by unethical government research. Our case became part of a larger legal effort to provide recognition and compensation for communities that had been unknowingly subjected to genetic experimentation. Today, I understand that being a true stepdaughter has nothing to do with DNA percentages or genetic markers. It's about the choice to love, to commit, to build something beautiful from whatever materials life provides. My genetic closeness to Michael and Rebecca is an interesting footnote in our family story, but it's not the story itself. The story is how we chose each other, supported each other, and ultimately discovered that the strongest family bonds are forged not in laboratories or through accidents of birth, but through the daily decision to show up for each other, no matter what science might reveal about our origins. Our family is proof that love transcends genetics, that chosen connections can be stronger than blood, and that sometimes the most profound truths about who we are come not from looking at our DNA, but from looking at how we choose to live and love together.